Hello and welcome to a special episode of Nothing But the Truth. Naina Kidwai, the India chairperson of HSBC, has edited a book comprising 30 essays by prominent women who lead large organizations in India. It offers a unique insight into three critical issues. How difficult is it for a woman to rise to the top? What are the qualities and characteristics that define leadership? And how important are the values and the encouragement you receive from parents and family? Today, in a special one-hour episode, I shall talk to 5 of the women covered by Naina Kidwai's book for their answers and, more importantly, their insights. They are the chairperson and editorial director of the Hindustan Times, Shobna Bhartiya, the first woman member secretary of the Planning Commission, Sudha Pillai, the Director General of the Centre for Science and Environment, Sunita Narayan, the CEO of Capgemini India, Aruna Jayanti, and of course, Naina Kidwai herself. Naina, before I come to all the other interesting things in your book, there is a key question I want to start with. Is it more difficult to succeed if you're a woman than a man? You write of yourself, I had to work much harder than my male colleagues to prove that I was, if not more competent, at least as competent as any other man. In a man's world, I knew I had to perform better than all men to get what I deserve. So let me ask you, how difficult was it to become chairperson of HSBC India?
So Karan, I think the journey that some of us started on way back in the early 80s, we were very few in the workplace, and the experience that I described there is really set in that time. I'd like to believe that that journey has changed, in that women entering the workplace today don't face quite that same issue. But yes, it was at the time, I would say, not hugely discriminatory, but yet underlying discrimination was more about, hey, are you up to it? And should we be putting our faith in you because you're an anomaly? And therefore, this issue about working hard. But once you were able to show results, I can't say I faced discrimination along the way.
Would you say that the success that you and your other colleagues have seen has actually made it easier for young women today to start in the workplace?
I would certainly like to believe so. I have no doubt that for every woman who has succeeded, it has paved the way for countless others, because the organizations, their boards, senior management have to only look over the parapet at other organizations to see that women have succeeded there, so why are they holding back?
Sunita Narayan, on the other hand, in your case, being a woman wasn't a disadvantage. You actually argue possibly it was an advantage. You write, does being a woman make the fight even harder for me? The honest answer is no. And then you add that working harder to explain yourself and to establish your credentials has worked to my advantage. Tell me more about that.
Well, Karan, you know, I've been asked this question often, and I think it's a very, very important question. But I do want to say that women like us are very privileged. I mean, I come from a family where 3 generations were literate women. They studied. And I cannot, therefore, play the gender card in that sense and say that, you know, I'm disadvantaged. I have to make sure that I can do well in my work. And the only thing it does, and I think what Naina has said very clearly, I would agree with that, it just makes us work much harder. Because we do know, and in my world, just like Naina's, it's a very male-dominated world. When I look at climate change issues, I look at environmental issues, I look at the lobbies that we deal with, whether it is diesel, whether it's pesticide manufacturers, these are all very, very male-dominated sectors. And the idea that a woman deals with issues which is not just soft science, but also hard science, looking at issues of real science and numbers. I think the most, you know, the thing that is amazing about Indian men is they basically believe Indian women don't know how to read a number. And most of them don't know how to read it.
And so that, in a sense, is a challenge that makes you prove not just yourself, but discover in yourself qualities that perhaps otherwise would have been latent.
Absolutely. I think it's been, in that sense, is a great journey.
So thank God for the fact Indian men don't think women are as good, because it forces you to be better.
Absolutely.
Shobna Bhartiya, you say that one of the pervasive things when you took charge of your father's publishing empire was, and I'm quoting you, the general air of condescension when I, a woman, assumed a position of authority. You say that you had to work hard because you were up against prejudice and preconception, and you had to work to earn respect. Was it ever disheartening and discouraging?
Of course it was, Karan, because you know, you're trying hard. You feel that acceptability is very different when it comes to a woman as opposed to a man. Of course, I'm also talking about the 80s, and a lot has changed in our society since then. But unlike Sunita or Naina, where it was, you know, their advancement was much more because of certain skill sets, because of the knowledge they brought to the table. Over here, you're seen as coming into this position purely because it's owned by the family. And therefore, you have to do that much more to kind of prove yourself, whether you're worthy of the job, whether you're worthy of the role, and whether your interest is going to sustain. So there is a distinction between professionals who sort of, you know, go up the ladder and family-run businesses. And in the 80s, the situation was totally different. And I didn't have to look outside. It was even within the organization, as I've even said in the book. People felt it could be a passing phase, and therefore you have to, you know, try and convince them. Otherwise, you have to prove yourself. You can occupy a position, but you can't earn respect in a position. And you can't get the authority of a position unless you sort of have the staying power.
Which means that being daddy's daughter made it additionally more difficult than it would have been otherwise.
For a woman, yes. I think it was sort of the mindset was such in the 80s that it was accepted in family-run businesses that the male heir would step in and would look after the business one day. So when that happened, there was a lot of acceptability. But for a woman, people felt it was an aberration and maybe a temporary one.
So that Pillai, the problem of a working woman is not just the fact that she's a woman, she is often a wife and a mother as well. In your case, how critical to your success was the fact you had an understanding and a supportive husband?
Well, actually, we were batchmates and we were classmates, and we both knew what the challenges were, you know, inherent in the work that we did. And I think that really helped, because I didn't have to explain to Gopal how tough my working day was. His was equally tough. And we could talk about work also after the kids had gone to sleep. So I think that really helped. And inherently, I found that there are certain things Gopal is very good at. And so that really helped. Yes,
in deciding to marry him, did you ever say to yourself, this is the sort of man who will give me the support that I need because I want to be a career woman and successful at it as well? Was it a determining factor?
No, it didn't occur to me at all. It's just that I liked him.
And it was a wonderful surprise to find that he was supportive and understanding.
He was supportive and understanding.
To the point of actually cooking and looking after children and taking them to the creche.
Yes, actually, it needed to be done. And later, when I went to Harvard for a master's degree, he took a year off. And nobody held it against him.
That's
the
amazing.
fact that he took a year off and came to the US with me.
Now, Aruna Jayanti, women who succeed are also wives, they're also mothers. You had a daughter, but you began working 3 days after she was born. 3 weeks later, you were back at work. How difficult was that for you and for your daughter?
No, my daughter was too young to even figure out what was going on. I don't think she cared whether it was me or my mom or whoever looked after her. But I think for me, I found it very normal. I was eager to get back to work. My mind was at work in any case, and I didn't find it difficult at all. And that's why I sometimes have a little bit difficulty when people say I need 6 months off. I appreciate it, I understand it, but I think what
So you're not in favor of maternity leave?
No, I am in favor of it. In fact, I work with people who I encourage them, even if they want to take 18 months off, for me it's not an issue. I take it. I think it depends on individual circumstances, right? I was lucky, and I think most Indians are lucky to have a very strong family support system, though I think it's breaking up a little bit, you know, in the urban situation. You don't always have the family around you. Joint families are not there anymore. But if you have that support system, then I think it's up to you to get up and say, look, I can rely on my support system, my family, whatever that is, and then get back to work. But equally, I tell people that if you want to take 1 year, even if you want to take 3 years off, it's not a big deal. I encourage that because, you know, I think that you can't take a short-term view of a career. If you look at a career as something that will span 30 years or 35 years, which is the case for most of us, how does 1, 2, 3 years matter?
Except tell me this, if a woman were to choose that when she has children, she wants to take a year off because her children are important, she wants to bring them up herself, has she not then lost time with her contemporaries in office? Have they not moved ahead and she's in a sense opted out? Then getting back in becomes that much more difficult.
You know, the question, Karan, is who are you comparing it with? Is the comparison to contemporaries, or is the comparison to what you want to achieve and what your own goals are? You know, if you take that viewpoint, I think you can easily catch up with contemporaries and even override them. You know, I'm not a stickler for believing in the batch concept, saying that, okay, we all move at the same level. No. We don't all move at the same level. You know, I can take a year off, come back, and then go up even more.
What about something else? You mentioned the importance of your mother who was there to help you when your daughter was born. What happens to single mothers who may not have mothers there to help them, who may not have ayahs and other support staff? Then is a woman at a huge disadvantage? Presumably, yes.
I think yes, but I think hats off to all those single mothers who decide to bring up children. I mean, that's a very brave thing to do. And I think organizations then have to play a role in figuring out how to support them.
You know, Naina, you heard Sudha Pillai talk a moment ago about how her husband Gopal had taken a year off when she went to Harvard so that he could look after the children. Something very similar happened in your life. Your husband Rashid gave up a good job in Delhi to move with you to Bombay because that's where your career was taking off. How difficult was it for Rashid to say, I'll put my job and my career second to Naina's?
Well, I can't say it was a discussion we had. I would never have dared to ask him because I could never have lived that down later. So it had to be his decision, and I was obviously delighted that he made it, and that the importance of being together was something that was important to him as well. And it's not like he gave up a career. He gave up a job in Delhi and then looked for another role in Bombay. But it was a choice that he made, and he made for himself, and that's why I love him for it. I think having the right husband is just a given. There is no way that you can come back from work and have a long face and cribs and complaints to cope with. So the one piece of advice I give everyone is make sure you pick your husband well, because God knows when it's going to come back to haunt you otherwise.
Which also suggests, doesn't it, that divorce is a very difficult thing for a successful career woman to handle, because it's an additional set of pressures on top of the pressures that she has at the workplace, and handling two can become a little bit of a problem.
Why just working women? And divorce is a horrible thing, period, right? Because of its emotional trauma, and if there are children engaged as well. So you want to succeed, and I think having the right partner actually is a big plus. It's not just making sure that there isn't the negative factor, but you know, you heard from Sudha how she was able to share her work stories. I had the same advantage, and as working women, we often have working husbands, and they understand where we come from. How wonderful that we can share our workplace experiences, and they get it. So for me, I have from Rashid experiences, stories, advice that nobody else could give me.
Shobna, you're a successful career woman, you're a mother, you're a wife. How difficult is time management, and how easy or difficult is it to devote yourself to being a mother or a wife or a career woman without letting the other aspects intrude at that moment in time? I mean, can you compartmentalize yourself?
I do. I think the essence of actually being a woman and having to be true to your workplace means you have to actually do good time management. To me, it comes very easily, Karan, and therefore I'm quite baffled often when people are gloriously unpunctual and have no kind of sense about time, because I don't think you can achieve all that you want to unless you do time management. And at the end of the day, it is the quality of time, I believe, and not the quantity that is important. So when you talk about family, you talk about children, you talk about a woman wanting to be a mother, a good homekeeper, I think you can achieve all of that in terms of a qualitative contribution that you make. I don't think it's necessary to be with your children the whole day. In any case, now I've got grown-up children who are working with me. But even when they were young, I would give them a few hours, but for those few hours, I wouldn't take phone calls, I wouldn't talk to people, I wouldn't call friends over. It was time committed and dedicated just to them. So I think it is important to plan your day to be able to achieve everything. But and time management is really of critical importance to me. I mean, I don't keep people waiting, and I don't let them keep me waiting. I leave if somebody keeps me waiting for beyond 15 minutes without any disrespect to him or her, but very politely, because if I were to keep waiting for somebody, then everyone else who's coming to meet me would get late and would keep waiting, and that's how the vicious cycle starts. So to me, time management is extremely important.
You know, this suggests to me that beyond time management, you have to be a very disciplined person.
Absolutely.
Is discipline therefore an important characteristic in you?
I think it is. Oh, totally.
See, one of the things that distinguishes women from men is that successful men don't seem to worry about being fathers and husbands. They don't see any conflict in it. They don't care about the fact that being at work disrupts marriage or takes them away from children. Does this suggest that successful women, particularly when they manage their time better, particularly when they have this discipline that Shobna was talking about, have a certain X factor that puts them a cut above successful men?
You know, Karan, I can't say this with personal experience because I'm unmarried and I have the advantage of being completely free in that senses. But I did see my mother. I lost my father when I was 8 years old. We were 4 siblings. I was the eldest. My youngest sister was only 6 months old. My mother worked and she managed us perfectly. And she made sure, exactly as Shobna says, to give everything time. And she loved a lot of things in life. She loved food. She loved flowers. She had the best garden in the city. And she had a passion for life. And to me, that's what it's all about. And when you have that, you juggle, you manage, and you make the best of every moment. And to me, I've learned from that, Karan, and I think that's the spirit of my mother, which I live every minute.
Then can I pick you up and ask you this? Would you say passion is the secret of success? If you're passionate about what you do, you will succeed.
I think passion and discipline. I think both of them combined. I mean, passion is...
Although aren't the two contradictory times?
No, I think that's maybe what makes women different, if I may say. That, you know, I keep saying my institution is a hybrid institution where we're supposed to be crazy loonies at one end, but we want to make sure that we're highly productive. So the best of the corporate world, the madness of the NGO world, that needs to be brought together. And I think that's what women bring to the table. An ability to be mad, passionate at one level, but highly disciplined and focused at the other. And what's wrong with that? That's what makes a great life.
Aruna Jayanti, let's pursue this question of what is it that makes for success. Naina Kidwai says in her essay that the hallmark of success is belief in yourself and the courage to take risks. As a CEO, would you agree?
Absolutely, I would agree with that. I'd just add on to say, to go back to Sunita's previous point, is first of all, it's the passion. You can call it passion, you can call it conviction, but absolutely, you must believe not just in yourself, but you must believe in the idea, you must believe in the organization, you must believe in what you're trying to set out to achieve, and have the conviction that you are going to make it work, absolutely. And then you'll find a way to make it work.
So in other words, this passion is in fact also another form of obstinacy, because when you see the odds, you say to yourself, I'm not going to bear them in mind, I'm going to disregard them. You have to be not just passionate, you have to be obstinate in refusing to give up.
I think so. I mean, you have to be absolutely committed. Maybe obstinate, maybe it's not in a negative way. You know, it gives a little bit of a negative connotation.
Determined, dedicated.
I would say determined, dedicated, absolutely committed to make it work, no matter what it takes.
So, Pillai, in a sense, you have a view that you expressed in your essay that maybe not quite a full opposite of what you've heard from both Sunita and Aruna, but different. You say it's important not to take yourself too seriously. And I put it to you, if you believe in yourself, you have to take yourself seriously. But if you're capable of distancing yourself from your beliefs, laughing at yourself and your commitment, even joking about yourself, then perhaps you're not taking yourself seriously.
No, I would say that I think what I meant was in a very negative way. I've seen people who are very full of themselves, and that actually impedes clear thinking, and that actually, you know, prevents them from giving everything their best. So they are so actually biased already to start with that in order to be efficient, in order to solve the kind of problems that bureaucrats face, you need to be very open-minded. And for that you have to go in with what Shakespeare said, negative capability. You have to go in with absolutely open eyes and with no preconceived notions. Otherwise you can't perceive things, you know, the way they are. You can't take in the wisdom of other people. So while you are very committed, you know who you are and what you want to do and what you want to accomplish, you also need to know that you are not the last word. That in any situation, whether you're dealing with juniors or with very senior people, you need to understand that finally you make up your mind, but after taking in everything.
You know, Shobna, you heard Sudha Pillai say that you mustn't become full of yourself. But when you are successful, you do end up becoming full of yourself. How can you not? Success makes you confident to believe that what you're thinking, what your hunches must be right. How do you then, in that sort of position, whether you're a man or a woman, also be humble and also be self-questioning?
Karan, I don't totally agree with you. I don't think there's a contradiction. In fact, on the contrary, I believe that when you do start succeeding and you do well, you have the confidence to be able to hear a contrarian or an alternate view, because you have enough confidence in yourself for somebody to come and tell you, no, this may be wrong. It's much more when you're sort of, on the way up, you're not totally self-confident, you're desperately trying to be something, that you don't tolerate a contrarian view, that you don't like a dissenting voice, that you're insecure about it. I believe that actually confidence comes from success, and that leads to, greater flexibility, greater open-mindedness. I don't agree. I think, on the contrary, as you become successful, you become a lot more kind of liberal in your thought process and in hearing dissenting voices.
In a sense, Naina Kidwai, there's something in your essay that would agree with what you just heard from Shobna. You write, do not be nervous about admitting ignorance. Don't hesitate to seek the advice of others. But I often come across bosses who seem to be know-it-alls, and the only advice they want to hear is advice that agrees with their viewpoint. Isn't that true of a lot of people when they become successful? And in a sense, I'm arguing the opposite of what Shobna said and what you've written.
So, those are the bosses that aren't going to remain good bosses for very long, because I think exactly as you're hearing from, in fact, it's a common theme through the book, that every one of the women has a humility that comes through, talks about the importance of teams and that you're only as good as the people who work with you, and the desire to learn, learn and learn, so that the process of learning never ends. And the minute you see these threads, you recognize in what are 30 women CEOs of this book, but clearly CEOs that succeed around the world are those that have the traits that you're hearing around the table today. The ability to learn, the humility to recognize when you're wrong, the openness to hear different viewpoints, and really it's about teams and working with teams.
Let me put this to you, Aruna Jayanti. Good bosses are often thought of as tough nuts, hard people. Is a successful woman boss capable of something else, being sympathetic to people when they have personal problems, being able to reach out in a way in which perhaps emotionally a man can't? And does that make a significant difference in the sort of boss a successful woman makes compared to a successful man?
I'm not sure about that, Karan, because I have seen men, my boss is very, very sympathetic, okay? And I've seen men who are equally good at empathizing with what the other side wants. And actually, it depends how much you put yourself in the other person's shoes and start to look at the world from their point of view.
So it's a human quality, not a gender-determined one.
Absolutely. I think it's a human quality, and it depends on, and I think both men and women have it. Maybe we see it more in women. Maybe women are less shy to show that side of it, but I think it's a quality that transcends gender.
We're discussing Naina Kidwai's book, 30 Women in Power. 5 of those are in fact with me, and we're talking about what makes them successful, what makes them different. Shobna Bhartia, let's come to some of the other elements that define the success of career women. One of the common factors that I found as I've read your 5 essays is the importance, if not critical role, of parents in nurturing an interest that then went on to become a career option. In your case, you write, during breakfast, no matter whether was in India or on holiday abroad, he would have his office compile a news digest and read out the most interesting or pertinent nuggets to us. Is that how your passion for news and current affairs began?
Possibly, Karan. I think that could be one of the factors, along with the fact that I also was always interested in politics and public life in terms of following what was happening. But the fact that my father always read out what was happening from an early age perhaps made me more aware and able to sort of assimilate all the news that one got through the day. And I think that was a factor, but also the fact that I was alone. There was no companionship. My siblings were much older and therefore they got married. So I think being a sort of an only child also makes you slightly more kind of serious than what one would have been at that age. And then stories that I would keep hearing about, what would happen, my father and my grandfather, the history of Hindustan Times, and through that a lot about the freedom struggle. So I think from an early age it was an area which was of great interest to me.
So beyond just what your father did in terms of reading out these news nuggets, it was the environment at home that, in a sense, created and then nurtured this passion for news and current affairs.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Sunita and Narayan, you had, in a sense, a very similar experience. You write of your childhood. My grandfather, Sri Krishna, was an eminent journalist with a keen interest in gardening. His house was a maze of plants and books. When I look back upon my childhood, I realize that my own desire to protect the natural environment and to use knowledge as a tool for bringing change stems from these moments.
Oh, absolutely, just like Shobna. I mean, our house was one Narendra Place, my grandfather's house, where the NDMC building is today. It was right next to that. And I grew up, my grandfather had books across every room, and I can only remember him lying flat on his stomach, writing his articles in longhand, long reams which would go out every day. And there were wonderful memories. And I also saw my mother and he shared a passion in gardening. I grew up, therefore, with books and plants. And I think it makes a lot of what we are in the future. We don't think about it because we're very, when I started working in the field of environment, I had no idea this was why I did it. I thought I was just myself, and it was all about my own understanding. But when Naina asked me to write this book, and I started thinking about my own life, and I never do that otherwise because it's pretty horrifying how boring it is, so I never think about it. But when I did, I was quite amazed to think that yes, it was that passion that molded me.
So would you say that the actual process of writing an essay for Naina's book forced you to think about yourself in a way you wouldn't have done before, and you then discovered linkages and connections back to your childhood? Has this been a self-revelatory process?
At some level, and I will never write this again. I don't want to think about my life again.
Can I ask you why?
I just think it's a very boring life. I mean, I spend all my time working. I love my work, and I would like to talk about what I do in my work. And I therefore, I mean, I think Naina, it's only Naina, and I will give her full credit for it, that she actually got me to think about myself. That's not what I believe my role in life is. I should be thinking about issues outside myself.
Yeah. Let me bring you in there, Naina, because in a sense you encouraged 30 women to write about themselves. In the case of Sunita, you had to overcome a huge reluctance that she had. Do successful working women have boring lives, as she says hers is? I mean, I get the feeling as I read these essays that these are people who have fascinating lives, and more than that, are fascinating people, which is what makes them, I'd say, successful.
I think one of the issues when I actually went out to pretty much all the 30 women was how self-effacing everyone was. There was a reluctance, a concern about, hey, am I going to be able to do it? I'm writing for the first time. And in fact, anything but boring. But I think the point that grabbed people was that my request was, guys, we've got to write, because for every story that's out there, there's thousands of others that are going to be inspired by your stories. And actually, when I run the test even today of this book past people in the business world who should be better informed, because these are women CEOs and women who are leading large organizations, only about 30% of the names get recognized or indeed get put together with the company. If I ask them who heads this company.
You mean to say the lady who's successful has become more important than the company she runs?
Or vice versa. What I'm saying is the recognition that the companies in India are not led by women isn't there. There are a few familiar faces in the world of finance and banking, well known, but otherwise, the fact that we have women such as these around this table and in the book, all CEOs, many people do not know who they are, and that is why, we need every one of you who's in this book and others to tell their story.
Which is why you chose deliberately not to include actresses, sportswomen and politicians, because those are three categories where women's success is known and understood.
So my reason was really, heck, I mean, someone needs to write those stories too. I'm not going to be the person to put that together.
Aruna Jayanti, let's move on to the sort of lessons people like you have learnt on the job. You write, one of the early lessons was that people work for people, and being an inspirational manager, connecting with people and earning their trust is critical. I get the feeling many people who've been my bosses have often forgotten this simple truth. What made you aware of it? The fact that people work for people.
You know, I work in an industry which is moving so fast and where talent is short. Okay, so it is very easy, and there people are constantly being poached. You know, I can get a job. I mean, somebody in my organization can get a job for 40% more tomorrow if he wants it. Okay, and there's rampant movement across the industry, and then you realize that how do you retain people and how do you really motivate them? It's not by giving them more money, and that's not what they stay for. They stay because they love their job, they love the challenge, they love the people that they work for. At the end of the day, it's about the connection that you can build with them. It's about how you can motivate them, how you can jointly build you know, a shared vision of what you want to achieve together. And I think that's what drives people. At the end of the day, no matter even all these things, no matter how challenging and interesting the job is, if you hate your manager, you'll walk.
Tell me something. You're talking about building a rapport and relationship with people who are your subordinates, sometimes very junior down the chain. Is it easy to bridge the gap that they perceive, maybe you don't, but they perceive between themselves and the boss?
I think first of all, you know, one has to make an attempt to understand their point of view. Okay, what is it that they are looking for? You know, sometimes as managers, we tend to think that, you know, it's, I think somebody said it, it's my way, you know, that works. But that doesn't work at all, especially in my industry, where I'm confident that somebody who's younger and fresh out of college knows far more about technology than I would know. So one is a recognition that, hey, somebody 5 levels below may be better. He has a different set of aspirations, understanding those aspirations and figuring out how best do I deal to make his life and his career a success.
You know, there's something you write in your essay about yourself, Sudha Pillai, that echoes what I've just heard from Aruna Jayanti. You say bosses need to be aware of the need for teamwork. Yes. And you then add the fact that some of the best ideas come from your junior staff. There's no room, you say, for exaggerated ideas of one's own importance. Is it not difficult to be a boss and still say to yourself that actually the best ideas are not from me and my equivalents, but from someone who's new and junior?
Actually, Karan, what happens is that you are confronted with a problem and you're trying to find solutions to that problem. And so your focus is not on yourself or on the team as such, but on finding the solution to that problem. And the focus comes back to you and your own team after the problem has been taken care of. And that actually is very exciting, it's almost intoxicating.
But
that
how easy is
with the kind of processes that you had, you were actually able to find a solution or to come to a conclusion that actually is proven right and actually helps really make people's lives better, because you actually encounter horrendous problems.
But how easy is it as a boss to accept and acknowledge that the best ideas often come from people very junior? Because quite often bosses don't even get to meet the junior people. Such is the way offices are structured, hierarchies exist, that you never get to see them. So you must have to make an extra special effort to reach out, to discover their views, and then to acknowledge that, hey, that's a lot better than what I thought and what my equivalents are thinking.
Actually, in our system, if you keep an open door, you permit your officers to walk in any time. And also, I think in our system, we are required to have staff meetings. And we are required to have discussions about issues. Whether you are in the central secretariat or in the subdivision as a 24-year-old trying to find solutions, you actually have to have a system which enables people to walk in any time, something occurs to them, and to give them a fair hearing, and also to meet people in groups. That's very important.
Shubhra Bharti, in your essay, you write about how it's important to learn from mistakes. And the mistake that you cite is Home TV, a venture that I was actually involved in with you. It's one thing, I say, to admit a mistake, but how easy or difficult is it to learn from it? Because that requires consciously sitting back and analyzing what went wrong. Is it easy to do it?
I don't think it's difficult, Karan. It depends on your own approach to a failure in business. It depends on your own mindset and the willingness to actually learn from it. You know, in the short term, it is definitely something that's very demoralizing and you do take a bit of a setback. But if you actually want to internalize what happened, what went wrong, there are many things that you can actually see if you had done them differently, perhaps the outcome would have been different. And then that becomes a learning. So much depends on your own attitude. You know, if you want to blame the whole world for it and shove it under the carpet, then you learn nothing from it. And that's really tragic, because bad enough there's been a bit of a setback, but you're none the wiser after that. Or on the other hand, you know, they say, I mean, if you don't take any risks, you can't be an entrepreneur. So you have to go out there, you have to take chances, and some go right and some go wrong. And I see no harm in that. And in fact, you do come out wiser, because you try and see what went wrong. Was it just purely luck? Because luck too plays a very important part in enterprise. Or were there things I could have done differently? And I think that one should try and get the best out of even a failed enterprise in terms of your learning, so that you can go back to that area, you can address it better, and you are wiser for it.
You know, I remember the home TV days, because I worked with you closely. You were very passionate about it. It was, in a sense, the first big venture that you were doing on your own.
And we had a first mover advantage.
Absolutely.
We were far ahead of all the other channels, but maybe a little too ahead.
So how difficult emotionally and personally was it to have to handle the fact that something you put so much time, effort and passion into didn't work out?
Well, it took a long time, Karan, but as they say that, you know, when you're in business, you have to cut your losses and move on. There's nothing worse than a business that you know is not going to turn around. There were too many problems. I don't want to take up too much time here, but a problem of too many partners. And you're right, it was something I was very passionate about. It was an idea which I thought is an idea that's going to actually become big in India. But perhaps it was a little before its time. And it did take a lot for me to accept that, you know, the way things are going, it's not going to go forward. And I think it's important to cut your losses and move on then.
Naina Kidwai, in your essay you say that one of the lessons that you learnt at Loreto Convent, which has always stayed with you, is the art of losing graciously in a sportsmanlike manner. But in your essay, you don't actually give an illustration of the sort of defeat you have in mind. So tell me, what is the sort of defeat where the art of losing graciously was so important?
Well, you know, in one's workspace, there are many battles lost and won. You can go into meetings with a very clear view, and then you find your team isn't with you, and you have to graciously acknowledge that maybe you weren't right, and that there is another view. And it is that. It is about accepting the view, saying, hey, you know, you guys have really got it right, and I had it wrong.
I was wrong to oppose you.
Absolutely. And I think if you go in with that approach, you achieve two things. One is all those wonderful bubbling ideas from young and old people in your team, which otherwise are swept under a carpet because they don't want to speak up. It's too much of a hassle because you will just keep batting back. And the other, of course, is that, yes, you will defend your view, but only because you want to hear their view too, so that you can flush out the best of the solutions and put that in. And I think that is about good team play. And I would just add that there again is another common theme across a lot of the women in the book, and that is their extracurricular activities, how they were in college. Aruna talks about drama and music, all of which gives the confidence to the young, growing girl in terms of engagement. And I would add that at the workplace, the women who choose to also do something outside of the workplace, the committees they perform on, the public policy spaces that people like Shobna got engaged in, these are all ways that help grow that interest.
Absolutely. The fuller the person, the better the person as well. But one of the themes, Sunita and Narayan, that's critical in this book is what I call the concept of leadership. And you write on that subject, leadership is never asserted, but accepted without fuss or fight. That sort of suggests that some people are born natural leaders and recognized, and others aren't and will never be.
No, I don't think that's what I meant, Karan. I meant that you needed to make sure that you stayed a leader, not by having to fight for it, but by being able to prove that you were a leader. And therefore you worked for it at every moment. And I'm sure all of us and everybody else who's had to lead groups of people has constantly had to make sure that, you know, we are both generous, we understand what people are saying, but we also assert where is needed. We also play the role of being thought leaders, which is in my world very important. That
I love that phrase, play the role of being thought leaders. It's almost
important.
as if you're acting to be a leader.
Well, it's not acting, but it is having to stay I'm struggling to find the right word.
Behave leader-like.
Yes, behave leader-like in a way that is not having to constantly come and say, I'm the boss, so you have to listen to me. You just do it well.
You earn it, but some people have a natural gravitas that reflects it. That's what I meant, that for some people it's just a natural born
I just have to work
quality.
at it. I'm not born for it.
You have a very interesting definition, Aruna Jayanti, of leadership in terms of developing talent, building strong teams, and then most importantly, you add, hiring people who will challenge you and others in the organization. And I'm going to quote, you say, being challenged day in and day out can be hard, but it has to be done for the growth of the organization. Do you really believe that good leaders want to be challenged and actually encourage challenges?
I think so. You know, there's a saying in management where they say that he's reached his level of incompetence, because at some point
that's the Peter principle, isn't it?
Yes, because at some point of time, if one starts to think that, hey, I'm insecure, if the guy below me is better than me, he's going to replace me, then I think that's the end of the organization. You have to be able to have the conviction that you always have to hire better than yourself at some point of time, because collectively then the team really moves up, otherwise it doesn't work. But it takes a lot, Karan. I have seen that's one of the biggest failing of leaders, is at some point of time they want to hang on to what they have and they will not build the team below that.
That is, in fact, by the way, I put it, a human quality that many bosses have. The fear that there's someone below them who's better, who will supplant them, and somehow, consciously or unintentionally, they keep that person down.
I completely agree, and I've learned it the hard way. I did it too at some point of time, but not because of insecurity, just because I didn't know better. And then I figured out that I couldn't move on to a bigger role because I didn't have the right person behind me to take on what I did. You know, so I learned it the hard way, that if I have to succeed, I have to recruit somebody who's smarter than me.
Which means having someone smarter than you snapping at your heels is actually the best thing you can do. It's make sure you run ahead.
There's nothing like a good challenge to keep you going.
Sudha Pillai, you talked a moment ago about the importance of setting goals and defining them and following them. And in fact, in your essay, you say that you need not only to know what the goal is, but you need to have a team that is constantly reminded about the goal. Now, you've been a civil servant all your life. You've worked in government. And I put it to you, goals are something we from the outside think governments quickly forget. You talk about the importance of quick decisions. We on the outside often think governments rarely take quick decisions. Is that difficult for you as a person when you worked in government to find that you're goal-oriented, quick decision-oriented, and yet the system militates against that?
No, not really. Actually, I was very lucky because I actually worked with people who were very intelligent and who were actually did not permit themselves to become authority figures, but actually were thought leaders. And also, you see, in between, you do encounter formal training programs. And one program that I attended at the Staff College in Hyderabad was, it said that every morning you must ask yourself, what business am I in? So is it my business to accomplish the goals of my organization, or to start interfering in the work that others are doing? And within government, actually, your working methods succeed very well because you have formal power. And your subordinates or your team people who are junior to you, enjoy that sense of accomplishment. So it was not tough, actually.
But you know, this question that you were asked to ask yourself when you were at in the Staff College in Hyderabad is another form of self-discipline, isn't it? What business am I in is a way of disciplining yourself so that you follow a prescribed, fairly narrow path rather than just flood all over the place.
Well, you do flood all over the place, but you do that in order to pick up bits of information that may appear irrelevant at one point of time. But then you see, then you come back to your focus. So that actually, because in government also your goals are very well defined. You are expected to implement, you're expected to contribute to policy making. So it's not difficult to come back to that focus, and it's not narrow, it's actually enriched by your initial you know, I would say enlargement of what you think the landscape is all about.
Karan, I just want to, support this. I think it's very important because I think the focus in where we draw, particularly for Sudha ji and people like us, it's very important to stay focused on where we can get action, what we can get changed, what we can do. Because in the world around us, there's so many problems. Everything has an issue which you can get involved in. Everything has something in which somebody wants you to comment in, somebody wants you to do. And I think for all of us, I'm sure the
pick your challenge.
Pick your challenge, stay focused, and some or the other win it.
You know, Shobhana Bhatia, as a promoter, you say, leaders are responsible for identifying talent and then trusting their teams. And you add, a promoter should never do anything that could undermine the position of the CEO. It is for the promoter to ensure that the authority of the hired CEO is established. But I put it to you, is it a hard rule to observe when the losses, when they happen at your personal cost, and you are the owner of the company?
Karan, when I said that, I spoke about the model that we were following. I don't necessarily think that's the only approach. So there are enough companies that are doing very well, which are promoter driven, and the promoters are very hands-on, and they themselves are the CEOs. I was talking about the model where the promoters actually believe in having a professional setup, which is what I undertook in 2000. Before that, it wasn't the case. And you then hire professionals, but they are only as good as the empowerment they get. If you have professionals and you don't empower them, then it's a kind of a very mixed model, and it's actually doomed to failure. So it's very important when you're hiring professionals and having an approach where you want to empower them, to ensure that, you know, you have to vest that authority in them. And you have to ensure that you pick the right talent, get the right talent, create an atmosphere that is conducive, and then let them do their jobs and then evaluate them. And as Aruna said, the biggest challenge then is constantly trying to identify talent, because the problem that I face, and that I'm sure many other CEOs and chairmen face, is one where people don't want to hire someone brighter than themselves. Succession planning is a big issue, and I'm sure it's an issue not only in the private sector, but even in the government, even in other sectors, to get the right talent. And that remains a challenge which I think the promoters have to constantly actually work towards. But I was talking about the model which we follow, which is actually a very professional setup. And naturally in that, it's absolutely, it's incumbent upon the promoter to actually empower the professionals.
In fact, you're saying a very interesting thing. When you say trust your CEO, you're actually trusting your own judgment in choosing that CEO.
Sure, you identify a CEO, you empower a CEO, and you constantly then try and evaluate the performance, and you make changes. You need to do that for your shareholders as a promoter.
Absolutely.
You can't put on a blindfold and sit.
Aruna Jayanti, beyond the specific issue of leadership, you have a very specific word of advice. And I want to quote it because I think it's very important, not just for women and men, it's very important for everyone in an organization. You say, dare to dream and dare to live those dreams. Does that mean that it's important for people as individuals to be ambitious, to be constantly striving to do more and to do better? And ambition is a very good thing.
Ambition is a good thing. And when I said dare to dream, it could be about anything. It's not necessarily about work. It's about
daydreaming as well?
Maybe not daydreaming. But, you know, it's really about one's approach to life, that if you want something, you go after it. It could be at work, it could be outside of work, it could be like wanting to climb Mount Everest, whatever else it is. I think everybody needs a passion and something to wake up every morning to and say, that's what I want to achieve. And that's what drives my life.
I think that's the perfect note on which to end this particular episode. My thanks to all 5 of you for joining me, sharing with me not just the story of your success, but also what's inspired you. And there we end this particular episode. If you have been, thanks for watching. Goodbye.